All right, we are recording. I may need to take a quick break here pretty soon if my boss walks in here. Session went a little late today at the house, and I need to give him a few updates. So I'll just step away from the computer and I'll say take a hard 5 minute break. If he walks in. All right. But what we're trying to do today is we're going to skip chapter 8, move right into chapter 9, because I want to introduce the concept of internal rate of return
It is
and
1, 2, 3, 4,
show you guys
5.
how to do some choices between different projects and how you compare those in your calculations. So this presentation should be a little shorter. So just, all right, take a hard 5. Hello.
Oh. Whew. No, just drop it. Just hand it. All right. Why didn't you do that? Because you're the nerd. Why didn't he do it? But he's sure. Why would you need to do this? Because I asked him what the potential word is. Why did they get to be in the house? I didn't tell them. No, they asked me what. I don't know. What? But he's like this. But 4120. I'm just pretty. You can't be on it. Just in time. Okay. And that's the number. So I'm not sure. There's a couple different rumors. One of the rumors is all weekend. Another one of the rumors is one day. It's one day. Yeah, that was it. So there's some chances tomorrow. I'm not going to remember. Oh, I just, yeah, I guess I'm not used to playing this whole thing. Oh. But they know I got it. They would say, it's like, yeah, we did do it. No, but yeah, you got it in. If we have a letter, correct me if I'm wrong, but if we have a letter from the cloud. With our OUI that's buried with this package. We have the letter. Yeah. Well, Filler, I went up to Filler after. At least we have a common area. Area we have a building. That's what I need. All right, so yeah, that was the. Now, I got a project. I understand. Um,
All right.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
Maybe I'm having too much. Maybe I'm not.
All right.
All right, thanks for taking me in.
Yep. I'm gonna.
Are you teaching for Bulgaria? Okay.
Then I'll be out of here. All right. So learning outcomes are going to be describe the importance of capital budgeting decisions in the general process. Describe how the net present value, so NPV is separate from PV as we've been going over previously. There is a technique that I'll show you at the end of the lecture here that you can combine a calculation to create a multiplier that you can use to get to the answer a little quicker. And then internal rate of return is pretty much what your project is proposed to earn rate-wise based on the numbers that you are plugging into the equation. As in, what's your present value, your initial cost, and how much are you proposed to get over the certain amount of time. And this will all fit into our, our build formula that has like the year, the rate, present value, payment, and future value. And I'll show you all that. And we're only going to go through half of the presentation PowerPoint today, and then I'll go over a couple end of the chapter questions just to get you guys moving in the right direction. So then we'll compare net present value technique with the IRR technique and discuss, based on the calculated values, if you should approve a project or not. So describe other capital budgeting techniques used by business to make investments. This will be next week. So I'm splitting this up into 2 weeks so you guys can have a good, hey, no, thank you. You too. It's Grand Central up in here tonight. All right, getting right to it. So what is capital budgeting? The process of planning and evaluating expenditures on assets whose cash flows are expected to extend beyond 1 year. So usually the current year is an expenditure, and then you get money in later years, and it's usually stated how much you get. So analysis of potential additions to fixed assets, and always think of it in a way where by purchasing or budgeting for a particular financing vehicle, your bottom line goes up. Always think about it like that. So long-term decisions generally involve large expenditures and very important to the firm's future. And the way you want to think about it is there's going to be you're going to have a lot in your portfolio. So each one of these financing vehicles is going to be a dot on the graph that gives you an average kind of line of attack to where your next purchase should be. So it's like a plot diagram that has this kind of curved line that would have different rates of return on it. Because you always want to diversify, spread your risk, and that's the spread. So it's rate and risk is that curve. So generating ideas for capital projects. A firm's growth and its ability to remain competitive depend on a constant flow of ideas for new products, ways to make existing products better, ways to produce output at a lower cost. So this is going towards how much money am I going to be bringing in each year, dependent upon these stated expenditures and costs versus, like make existing products better is going to bring in more revenue or increase your margin. Producers must be established for evaluating the worth of such projects. And that is, that goes into, the previous experience of your firm's portfolio. And then also being able to establish a trust factor in the valuation of projects that are brought to your table. So we'll get into some examples in a little bit. So replacement decisions are whether to purchase capital assets to make to take the place of existing assets primarily to maintain existing operations. So this can be one of your plants is old and it's running at a certain efficiency. New technology creates a project that would build a new plant that's much more efficient, but you got to weigh that initial cost. How much is this new plant going to cost? And if over time the operations will stay the same, will this new plant increase my bottom line if we cease the operations of the old plant? So expansion decisions, whether to purchase additional capital projects to increase existing operations, grow the firm. So this is saying it's working well, let's invest to scale that. Independent projects are projects whose cash flows are not affected by the decisions made about other projects. So those are standalones, and those are part of your portfolio because it's different than something that you're scaling, investing heavily in. It's something that you've invested in once, and it creates its own revenue or cash flows over time. So these are important to the diversification of your portfolio and spreading out risk. And then mutually exclusive projects. A set of projects where the acceptance of one project means that the others cannot be accepted. So depending upon if the projects are mutually exclusive or not, you will be accepting one project or multiple projects if they're not mutually exclusive. And I'll give you some parameters on acceptability of projects here in a little bit. So the post audit is always, you want to make sure that you're in the general ballpark of what you originally wanted to be, because in terms of non-contract cash flows, they do fluctuate a bit, and you have to keep that in mind. So it compares actual results with those predicted by the project sponsors and explains why any differences occurred. So if the project sponsors gave you these numbers and then there were some delays that added to the cost, and then regulation passed that said, hey, you can't do this in this specific way, so you have to do it this way, which adds to the cost. All of that has to be calculated for. So you want to improve forecasts and improve operations with post audit, because delays do happen. So keep that in mind. Similarities between capital budgeting and asset valuation. So I'll go through these and then I'll try, I try to give you real world examples that you can think of. So estimate the cash flows expected from a project, which is always important when you're trying to figure out if your bottom line is going to go up or not. Evaluate the riskiness of the cash flows. So that's saying, depending on the project, what's the likelihood that I'm going to get this money in the end? 3, compute the present value of expected cash flows to obtain an estimate of the asset's value to the firm. And that's why you're always going to have your required rate of return. That's what obtain an estimate of the asset's value to the firm. So you always want to be able to set a requirement, meaning that it's worth a certain value to you at a certain point in time. And that's what creates these secondary markets.
Can I use?
Compare the present, bless you.
Mute yourself.
Compare the present value of the future expected cash flows. So these are just notes, and you'll see these all over. With the initial investment, if the present value of cash flows is greater than the initial investment, purchase the asset. So this is another way of saying, if something has an initial cost of $75,000, and then over 3 years you're going to get $26,000, But then you have to calculate in that percentage. So there's always a rate of return or a discount rate. So keep that in mind. So you'll have to calculate these in over time. Any questions on any of that?
How do you want to leave here, babe?
All right. So this is the handwritten formula, and it takes into account the summation of cash flows over time, and then you add in the rate, and then raise it to the time period that you're in. So these are familiar throughout the entire course. You're going to see these, even going deeper. So the decision rule is if your net present value is greater than $0, you accept the project. And that's your NPV rule.
Right?
No, can I make myself and check his remote?
Haven't prepared. Oh, you're saying going from off you might wake up.
All right. So in these in your given sponsor, when they sponsor a project, they're going to give you some given cash flows over time, and this is all because of that previous experience, which helps authenticate that value that's being presented to you. And usually it's you get
It would.
amount of years, and if you're comparing projects or not. Usually the other projects are will always have different cash flows, but the initial the year zero is your initial entrance into the project, and there's usually a cost that's associated with that. So usually year zero is going to always be associated with a negative number. So just remember that piece. Project timeline. So this is year zero, year one, all the way to year 4. And then these are your projected cash flows over time. And then these are 2 different projects that both cost the same amount, but you get different cash flows over time. So if we had a rate of return for your company, then we'd be able to diagnose which one of these projects is a better choice, or if both of them are a good choice if they're not mutually exclusive. So here we have the rate is 10%. So using our, this is a timeline view, but we can also, compact all that into one formula, which I'll show you at the end here. So rationale for net present value method. So if net present value is equal to present value of future cash flows minus the cost, then you gain wealth over time. So in the end, you'll be higher than you were before you entered into the project or the financial vehicle. So accept any project if the net present value is greater than 0. You have to choose between mutually exclusive projects on basis of higher net present value. So if they're mutually exclusive and one has a net present value of 5,000 and another has a net present value of 44,999, you choose the higher one, the 5,000. Even though they both give you a similar amount, always choose the one that gives you more. So that's getting into the nitty-gritty of that. So which projects should be accepted based on, and this is this data here, the answers are net present value project S is 161, net present value project L is 108. So if project S and L are mutually exclusive, you accept project S because it has a bigger NPV. And if projects S and L are independent, meaning not mutually exclusive, you accept both because both have an NPV that is greater than 0. So let me know if anybody has any questions on any of that. All right, so internal rate of return is the rate of return that will be earned if a project is purchased and held for its entire life. And the IRR decision rule is a project is acceptable if the internal rate of return is greater than your required rate of return. So now we're getting into things that sound the same but are completely different. So internal rate of return and required rate of return are two different things. IRR comes from the project itself. Firm's required rate of return comes from the cumulative engagement of projects and financial vehicles. So that's the difference there. One's macro. This is your firm's required rate of return is macro. And then IRR is micro to each project. And then again, you're going to see the similar formulas all over the place. So it's always, this is your cash flow, and they're all estimates because you haven't entered into the project yet. So the initial one is always going to be negative, and then you add in cash flows over time, and then you raise it to the time period that you're dealing with. It's usually current year, 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, etc. So a project is acceptable if the internal rate of return is greater than your required rate of return. And we'll do an example of that at the end of the lecture here. This is the bringing it back. So the bringing it back timeline version of internal rate of return. We're trying to figure out what the rate is based on your initial cost, your cash flows over time, and how much time is going by. So that's how you think about it. So calculating IRR for Project S, you have your negative 3,000 plus the cash flows over time divided by 1 plus your IRR raised to 5. And then it equals to your future value, which is 0. So always think about it as in at the end of the project, no more is going to come in. So that cash flow ceases after the life of the project. Financial calculator, enter the cash flow sequentially into the CF register. And that's just these here. So you enter in the negative 3,000, 1,500, 1,200, 300. And then you press the IRR button and you get, but there's another way to do it with Excel, and I'll show you how to do that. So rationale for IRR method, if a project's IRR is greater than the required rate of return, then some return is left over to boost the stockholder returns. So that's why you're always saying, okay, my individual project internal rate of returns should be greater than the required rate of return, so that I can help out bringing the bottom line up so that we can give all the stockholders more earnings per share, higher dividends, etc. So decisions on project S&L per IRR would mean if project S and project L are independent, you'd accept both, because remember way back with like 10 slides ago, we had that rate of 10%. Both the internal rate of returns are better. So one's going to give you 11.4%, one's going to give you 13.1%, and they're both greater than 10%, meaning you should accept both of those. So engage in the projects, make them happen. If they're mutually exclusive, you choose the high one with the highest IRR. So then it would be, okay, we can either choose L or S. And since S is higher IRR than L, we're going to choose S. All right, so that is the end of the presentation. Let me get, let's see here. Let's see which we're doing. So chapter 9, number 1, 3, 4, and 6 is what I'm assigning. So I'll go and get in. Let's see here. Let's get an Excel sheet up and go at it. Okay. All right, so let's do number 2. Zebra Fashions is evaluating a capital budgeting project that should generate $104,400 per year for 4 years. If its required rate of return is 16%, what is the value of the project to Zebra? B, if Leopard Fashions evaluates the same project with its required rate of return of 12%, what will it determine the value of the project to be compared to the 2 results? All right, so we need our regular build here. And then just plug in the what we know. So when it says a capital budgeting project that should generate $104,400 per year for 4 years, that's your payment. So 104,400, 4 years was the number. We're looking for the present value. So the interest is going to be 16%, so 0.16. Payment type is 0, future value is 0. So future value 0 means those payments will cease to come in. That's what it means. So just, we've been doing this all semester now, so it should be, oops, that's rate and per payment, future value. So $292,130.06. That's going to be what you would have to spend today if your required rate of return is 16%. You want to make $104,400 over the next 4 years. So that's the value of the project to them, to that firm, to Zebra. So the next question is saying, let's figure out what the value is to another firm, Leopard. So all of this stays the same except for one thing, the percent, 12% versus 16%. So 4.12, 1.400, is present value. And per all right, and that's a little more. So let's see here. And then it asks us to compare. So I'll just read an excerpt here. So when the interest rate is lower, 12% versus 16%, we should expect the present value to be higher because the opportunity to earn interest is lower. So that's a good way to think about that. All right, let's keep going. Let's move on. Let's do a couple more. Yeah, this one will be a shorter night. Because I'm gonna upload the case study and discussion question after this, and then I'll upload this recording to the homepage like we usually do. All right, let's do number 5. What is the internal rate of return of a project that costs $20,070 if it's expected to generate $8,500 per year for the next 3 years? Well, there is a couple of ways to do this. We can, if it's a constant cash flow, then we can use our build to figure out this. So let's plug in what we know here. We have 3 years. Look, that's what we're looking for. Our present value is negative 70. Excuse me, 20,000. 7. Oops. Negative $20,070. Payment is $8,500 per year, and that's 0 and 0. So equals rates. And payment. Present value. So 13, and bump it out a little bit. 13%. Another way to do it is you need 3 things. You need years, then you need costs. No, I guess you only need 2 things. So y is 0, y1, y2, y3, 3 years. Cost negative 20070. Then equals IRR. So IRR is the new command. And then you just put the values in there. So and that's if, no, that even if the values are different here, you'd be able to use this IRR command. Not in this one though. So that's why only if your cash flows are constant after the initial cash cost, you can use this format. But if not, these can be any number after the initial cost, and you'll get the internal rate of return. So moving on. Let's do number 7. So Piping Hot Food Service is evaluating the capital budgeting project that costs $75,000. The project is expected to generate after-tax cash flows equal to $26,000 per year for 4 years. Piping Hot Food Service's required rate of return is 14%. Compute the project's A, net present value, and B, internal rate of return, should the project be purchased. So we can use, let's just go one at a time. So we'll do A first. So net present value. So let me show you this multiplier. So this is a multiplier. That you can use to find out any net present value. So technically what it is this. And this is how you would type it in Excel. So you have 1 minus. Hold on, let me see here. Okay, then we have 1 divided by 1 plus rates. Close. Raised to the t. Double bracket divided by the rate. So this is, and it's, so when you're using Excel, you have to be particular about the parentheses. So another way to look at this is we have a rate of 14% and we have 4 years. So we're expected to get this cash flow for 4 years. So let's extrapolate that into this problem here. So if we use this formula with these numbers, we're going to get 1 minus 1 divided by 1.14 raised to 4 bracket divided by 0.14. Boom. So again, if you wanted to see that. So using this formula right here, we plug in 14% and then 4 years to find out your multiplier. So now NPV is equal to present value plus payment raised to the, multiplied by. So let's do that right here. And then we have, so let's just write it out a little more. So present value is negative 75,000 plus 26,000 times the multiplier. So solving, let's just solve it now. So I'm trying to, so when you review this, you can build it one step at a time. So equals negative 75 plus so that's your net present value, and it's positive, so it's greater than 0, so that's a good project. All right, now to find the internal rate of return, we can say n equal to 4, negative 75,000, the present value, 26,000, 0, 0, equals rates. And so this is our IRR. And then we can say, should the project be purchased? So then we can say NPV is greater than 0 and IRR is greater than our rate, which equals yes, purchase. So our rate was 14%, 14.49 is greater, and that's a positive net present value. So, bam. And that's how we do it. So just, this is the most complicated piece right here, is the multiplier. But if you can learn the multiplier, and then, you know, kind of put it into an automatic macro calculation, you'll be set, because then it's as easy as your initial cost plus your other costs multiplied by the multiplier. And then and this is for constants. So only if your cash flows are constant after your initial cash flow. All right. So any questions on any of that? All right. So due number 1, 3, 4, and 6 due next week. I'm about to upload a discussion question and the case study materials. I'll email that to everybody so you guys have an idea of what I'm requiring. And it should be fun, but there are going to be some complicated pieces, and just email me if you have any trouble. All right. Any questions at all before we sign off here? All right. So I'll post this on the homepage, and I will see you guys next week.